Hello and welcome. I'm Matthew Stone, and this is Warscope Intelligence, your fast, focused briefing on the stories shaping global security. The most powerful man in the free world stood in front of reporters and said something that simply does not hold up to scrutiny. A Tomahawk cruise missile, manufactured exclusively in the United States and sold to only 4 allied nations, somehow ended up in Iranian hands and was used to bomb an Iranian girls' school. That is what Donald Trump wants you to believe. And that tells you everything you need to know about where we are right now. Welcome back to the Trump Report. Today we are cutting deep into the Iran war, what it means for Putin's global standing, the billions Russia now stands to lose, and the moment Trump made a claim on camera that no one in his own administration is backing up. Joining me today is the one and only Sir Bill Browder, investor, political activist, and one of the sharpest minds tracking the intersection of money and power in this conflict. Bill, great to have you back. Always good to be here. Let's start with the Tomahawk story because this is what everyone is talking about. Around 10 days ago, a girls' school in Iran was struck, killing somewhere between 150 and 180 civilians. Footage, images, and independent investigations all point to the same conclusion. A U.S. Tomahawk cruise missile carried out this strike. When reporters pressed Trump on this, he suggested Iran itself could be responsible. A reporter pushed back immediately and asked him directly, "Are you seriously claiming Iran acquired a Tomahawk missile and used it to bomb its own school on day one of the war? And why are you the only person in your administration making this argument?" Trump responded by saying he didn't know enough about it, that it was under investigation, and that Tomahawks are used by other nations who purchase them from the U.S. Bill, Tomahawks are built in America and sold to exactly 4 countries: the United Kingdom, Australia, Japan, and the Netherlands. That's it. So what is actually happening here? This is a deeply troubling situation. When the commander-in-chief of the most powerful military in the world stands before cameras and presents a version of events that contradicts every available piece of evidence, that is not confusion. That is a choice. This is not the first time this has happened, and it certainly will not be the last. But every time it does, it chips away at the credibility and the dignity of the United States on the world stage. The facts are not in dispute by anyone else in his administration. He is standing completely alone on this, and that isolation should tell you something. Now let's zoom out, because the Tomahawk story does not exist in a vacuum. At the same time Trump is managing the optics of this strike, his administration this week temporarily lifted oil-related sanctions on Russia, allowing countries like India to purchase Russian oil and easing restrictions on Rosneft's refinery operations. Trump's own words were that they'd remove the sanctions until things straighten out, and maybe they'd never go back on at all. Bill, there has been zero movement on Ukraine. No ceasefire, no negotiations, no surrender. So who exactly benefits from removing these sanctions right now? To understand this, you have to start with the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of the world's entire oil supply flows through that single narrow waterway. Emirati oil, Saudi oil, Kuwaiti oil, all of it has to pass through in order to reach the open market. When that supply gets disrupted, you feel it everywhere almost immediately. We already saw oil spike to $125 a barrel as a direct result of this conflict. That creates a global economic shockwave that lands on every government's doorstep. The Saudis do have a pipeline running to the Red Sea that bypasses the strait entirely, and they can push roughly half their production through it. The Emiratis have a similar alternative route, but neither of those fully resolves the shortage. So there is a real and legitimate pressure on policymakers to stabilize global energy supply. Here is the problem, though. Russian oil never actually left the market. It was always available. The only variable was who was willing to absorb the political risk of buying it. What lifting these sanctions actually does is hand Vladimir Putin a revenue windfall. Russian oil income potentially doubles. And when Putin's income doubles, his ability to keep funding the war in Ukraine doubles with it. So if Trump's stated objective is to end the Ukraine war, this move works directly against that goal. It is, without exaggeration, the single worst step he could take if ending that war is genuinely what he wants. And yet, Trump has not said a single critical word about Putin, not for the sanctions relief, and not for something even more serious. U.S. officials have now confirmed that Russia was actively feeding Iran targeting intelligence, the precise locations of American warships, aircraft, and military assets across the Middle East, with the explicit intent of enabling strikes against U.S. forces. At the same time, the U.S. had to go back to Ukraine and request drone warfare specialists to be deployed to American military bases. And what was Trump's response to all of this? He attacked Zelensky. He attacked Biden. He did not direct one word of criticism at the man whose government was helping Iran target American soldiers. Here is the only framework that makes any of this coherent. There was a detailed Wall Street Journal investigation published a few months ago that mapped out the business deals, transaction by transaction, that individuals in Trump's orbit are pursuing with Russian counterparts. The financial incentives are so significant and so direct that they appear to be overriding what any national security calculus would normally demand. There is no version of America's national interest that involves staying silent while a foreign power shares intelligence designed to kill American military personnel. None. The only explanation that fits the behavior is that the financial relationships are driving the decisions. And here is where it gets even more layered. Ukraine had already developed battle-hardened counter-drone technology, built specifically to neutralize the Iranian-made Shahed drones that Russia has been deploying for years. Months ago, Ukraine proactively offered this technology to the United States. The Trump administration turned it down. Now they have gone back to Ukraine asking for help. Think about the cost asymmetry here. Iranian drones run between $20 and $30 million to produce. A single Patriot missile or comparable interceptor costs $4 million just to fire. You are burning through expensive interceptors at a rate that is simply not sustainable. If this conflict extends beyond the short term, America and its Gulf allies face a real possibility of depleting their intercept stockpiles faster than they can be replenished. Ukrainian technology offers a far more cost-efficient solution to this problem. When Trump and J.D. Vance stood in the Oval Office and told Zelensky he had no cards to play, this is exactly what those cards look like. Now let's talk about what this war is actually costing Putin, because while he may be seeing a short-term bump in oil revenues, the long-term picture is far darker for Moscow. Russia has sunk over $4 billion into Iran through oil and gas infrastructure projects. Those investments are now at serious risk of never being recovered. Energy developments that were years in the making could be abandoned entirely. Beyond the financial exposure, Iran was a critical military partner, supplying Russia with Shahed drones that became a cornerstone of its air assault strategy in Ukraine. Russia has largely replicated that technology domestically now, so that dependency is faded. But the loss of Iran as a strategic ally is a blow that goes well beyond any dollar figure. Because the real cost Putin is paying is the collapse of his global alliance network. Before the Ukraine invasion, he had a constellation of partners that gave him reach and leverage far beyond Russia's borders. Bashar Assad in Syria, Maduro in Venezuela, Khamenei in Iran. Partners across the Caucasus. Every single one of those relationships has now either broken down or been severely weakened. Armenia, gone. Venezuela, gone. Syria, gone. Iran, effectively gone. That is not just a geopolitical inconvenience. That is the destruction of the entire architecture Putin built to project himself as an indispensable power broker on the world stage. I have always described Putin as a Potemkin leader, the reference being to those elaborate false front villages constructed to impress the Tsar during a royal procession, with nothing real standing behind them. That is Putin. The military that was going to conquer Ukraine in 72 hours is now grinding through its fourth year of a war it cannot win. The alliances that were supposed to demonstrate his reach have disintegrated. And when a leader whose entire domestic legitimacy rests on the image of strength begins to visibly fail everywhere the world is watching, the audience he most needs to convince, his own people, starts paying very close attention. Putin's entire political survival is built on the performance of dominance. Once that performance falters, there is no second act. And it is already faltering. One more thing worth addressing. Putin this week announced that Russia stands ready to resume natural gas and oil supplies to Europe whenever European nations signal their interest. He framed it as if Moscow never closed that door. Let's be precise about what actually happened. Putin made the decision to cut off natural gas to Europe as a pressure tactic to stop European support for Ukraine. Countries like Germany, which sourced more than a third of their gas from Russia, were forced into emergency supply arrangements at enormous financial cost. Europe adapted. It was painful and expensive, but they found alternative suppliers and restructured their energy infrastructure. Now that the Iran conflict has briefly pushed oil to $125 a barrel, Putin senses an opening to make Europe feel that pain again and come back to the table. Europe is not coming back to the table. The price spike appears to be temporary. Oil has already begun retreating from those highs. And no European government is going to restart energy dependency on the man who weaponized that dependency against them. Unless prices were to stay elevated at $125, $150 a barrel for a sustained period, which at this point seems unlikely, nothing in Europe's posture toward Russian energy changes. Sir Bill Browder, as always, this has been an extraordinary conversation, and one that every person following these events needs to hear. Thank you for having me.